Closing the gender gap in manufacturing and promoting a welcoming workplace are essentials of modern manufacturing. That's why the Manufacturing Institute is doubling down on its STEP Women's Initiative, bringing together women from across the country, building networks of support, and sharing best practices. In just 9 years, STEP has positively impacted more than 300,000 individuals. And with the help of the Creators Wanted Tour, we'll increase our local engagement and work hand in hand with women going through community colleges. Through the Creators Wanted Fund, we'll grow STEP into a year-long program that encourages participants to pay it forward and mentor the next generation of women in manufacturing.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's virtual Step Forward on the Confidence Gap. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. We will be recording this webinar and we'll share a link with all registrants after the event. All participants' microphones have been muted upon entering the meeting. Lastly, there is a chat feature which can be accessed from the bottom of your screen, where we encourage you to post discussions and resources to supplement today's conversation. If you have any questions for the panel, please feel free to post in the chat. And without further ado, I'd now like to introduce AJ Jorgensen, Vice President of Strategic Engagement at the Manufacturing Institute.
Thank you, Serena, and thank you all for joining us here today for our virtual Step Forward event. Today, we're going to hear from women leaders share about how the confidence gap has impacted and exacerbates the industry's gender gap. And we're going to address challenges and opportunities to create a more supportive culture in our workplaces. This session is brought to you by the Manufacturing Institute's Step Forward program, which is a part of the Institute's STEP Women's Initiative. And that initiative is to provide women in manufacturing an opportunity to hear from industry leaders, connect with their peers, and learn best practices that they can bring back to their companies. Today, we're going to discuss how working women have been limited by the confidence gap. Many reports have found that there are no gender differences in self-reported confidence. That is to say, if you are asking both a man and a woman how capable they are, the results will be comparable. However, among similarly high-performing workers, appearing self-confident did not translate into influence equally for men and women. So for women, but not men, influence was closely tied to perceptions of warmth, how caring she seemed. Moreover, women's self-reported confidence did not also correlate to how confident these women appear to others. So while there's been a plethora of research about this topic, and not, I would say, specifically remedy directed, we have seen things like HR policy trainings and changes, awareness campaigns, lots of ideas. But today I want to hear, and I'm honored to be joined by 3 women leaders in manufacturing to discuss what they've seen, their best practices, their experiences in specifically manufacturing. So thank you for joining us as panelists. And Sandra, do you want to give us a little bit of a brief bio about yourself and your background?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, AJ. We're excited to talk with everyone and share your stories. Hi, my name is Sandra. I am actually based here in California, San Francisco. I actually started as a manufacturing engineer, quality engineer on the manufacturing line, and have transitioned over to a business position, which is in supply chain management with our vendors. I came from an engineering background and transitioned over into like the business world without a formal like business degree or MBA. So a lot of what I learned was on the job training. I'm currently here at Facebook. What I do is manage all our infrastructure data server data centers. And then I'm actually in transition to a management team management position over at Square, where we'll be creating like point of sale devices, so payment terminals.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Peggy, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
You bet. So I'm Peggy Gulick, and I work for Kohler Company. I've been here literally 40 days, 2 months. So a great topic for me at this point in time. I'm director of their smart factory. So we have globally around 60 factories that I work with. And my background, though, really came from IT, to lean business practice, then to the digital transformation, and now that innovation piece. And I think with all the women here, I have to add in, I have 4 daughters, all 4 going into the sciences. So I feel that I've achieved at least some of what we're going to discuss today, but I'm very proud of each one of them as they've entered the world.
And Louisa, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Well, great to be with you all. My name is Louisa Parker-Smith, and I'm with AGCO Corporation. So we design, manufacture, and distribute farm machinery. And yeah, I have spent about 8 or 9 years with AGCO in a variety of different roles in a variety of different regions. So I started off in the UK, spent some time in Africa, went to the US, and just a couple of weeks ago relocated. So my worldly possessions are on the sea, and I'm kind of settling back into a new role here, but really great to be with you all. My roles at AGCO have been very varied. Most recently, I'm the head of sustainability for AGCO Corporation, but I've spent time in distribution development, in marketing, and also actually did a stint as the global HR business partner for our manufacturing, supply chain, and materials management group. So I always say with sustainability, the more teams that you can work with, the better, because you kind of need to work with everybody to get things done. So really great to meet you all.
I love this. This is gonna be a great conversation. So I want to jump right into the confidence gap. Louisa, I'll start with you. Have you experienced the confidence gap in your work? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it would be hard to find a woman that hasn't experienced the confidence gap in some way. I mean, you know, like you said at the outset, it's not so much a question of capability. I have put myself forward for many promotions when I've seen an opportunity, but I have many times in my career been a lonely only. Take, for example, when I was responsible for distribution development in Africa, I was the only woman on the leadership team there, and also I was the only woman leading a group of distributors, which were all headed by men. 33 countries in Africa, and not one woman to be seen. So, you know, that does have ultimately an impact on how you feel about yourself, and often these things do come down to the confidence. You know, are you working with people that kind of are like you, and kind of can you bounce ideas and kind of share those experiences? So, I mean, how did it manifest for me? I would say it was more inward. So like I said, I would go for the promotions, but I would often do a bad job at negotiating. And I would sort of be negative in how I'd talk to myself. You know, it's great that I've been offered the role, but maybe I'm less experienced than I should be. Maybe I was lucky to get this opportunity, probably shouldn't negotiate too hard, and did that a lot earlier in my career. And then I would say I underestimated my abilities a lot of the time. I would often be on teams, but I would be a little bit reluctant to put my hand up and actually lead the team, only to see that, you know, maybe I would have done a better job if I had done that. That happened a lot. And then with events like this, you know, often with these speaking opportunities, it would be, I guess I would say, traumatic in the days leading up to it, because I would catastrophize the outcome and have this sort of awful public failure of ability, and you know, always to find that the opposite was true, and then I'd just go through the same each time. So the result ultimately is just burnt. You can get burnt out emotionally, and it's a real challenge, and it's something that I think we all go through. And it takes a lot of energy to kind of get to a point where you really start to bridge that gap and start to feel more confident and believe in yourself, and be the best person that you can be, I guess.
I like all of the issues that you raised that I think we all are dealing with. Peggy, Sandra, have you guys also, I mean, we all have, right? But how is the confidence gap manifested for you?
Yeah, so I cannot agree more with what Louisa said. Number one, you know, being the only female in the room is always going to lend itself to a little bit of questioning, maybe not insecurity, maybe not confidence gap, but questioning. Going into a new role, you know, I've really had to go back and re-experience it, right? Because our reputations are built on what we have delivered, you know, what our track record is, what our competencies are known to be. And when you join a new company who are already advanced and have teams of people that have all their own competencies and their records that they're hanging their hats on, you hit about week 3 and you go, wait a minute, why did you have me come in here, right? It's like, So I think there's that question all the time. I don't think it's an unhealthy question though, right? I think it makes you stop and reaffirm with your values and your beliefs and what you're trying to achieve. Where you fit and what value you can drive. So I do not look at it from a negative perspective, but absolutely that confidence issue occurs regularly, and in a big change transition like this, even more so than ever.
And Sandra, you're going to transition right now.
I can't agree more. Going to, what Peggy has and a more, obviously you've been at the company for 40 more days than I am. I'm looking forward to obviously this new team, a new company. But kind of going back to when I was transitioning from like an engineering role over to the business function world, I worked with a lot of, the folks on the team that is currently my role in supply chain. So even when I was like transitioning, like, I built up that reputation on the engineering side of things. So I kind of knew a lot. And I've always been, prepared in my work and work streams. And then when I was transitioning over to the business function, there were just so many questions and so many things I gotta like, in a way with the adjacent transition, like relearn and relive. And so for that perspective, transitioning even roles within the company, even if I worked with the people, the same team as before, adjacent teams, there's just like so many things where I'm like, whoa, this is very interesting. But when I was asking those questions, because we work with a dynamic manufacturing environment, things are always constantly changing too. And so they also had the same questions. So I was like, oh, maybe it's not just me. Mm-hmm.
So we know that self-promotion is an important part of career success, right? I mean, that's what helps determine promotions and bonuses, recognition. There was recently, though, 2 new studies from the British Medical Journal and Harvard Business Review. And it was essentially came to the conclusion that women don't hype their own work nearly as much as men do in a variety of ways. So do women need to be more aggressive about self-promotion, or on the flip, do men need to stop inflating their work? What is the solution? What is your thoughts?
I mean, it's really challenging because you're sort of damned if you do and you're damned if you don't in many respects. As there's also a lot of research out there that says that women receive a social or an economic penalty if they over promote. So I do like that suggestion that you had about, do men need to stop not necessarily inflating themselves, but we assume that women are doing something wrong and they have to promote themselves more, negotiate harder. But maybe we should also encourage men to lean out and start to change some of the norms in the organization. So I think sometimes it's kind of interesting to flip it a little bit. But for me, I think what is important, and has certainly been important for me in my career, is to ensure that you give yourself some visibility. And visibility doesn't have to be like obvious promotion. You could write a blog post, or you could ask to present something at an event. I think they're really important, but the key thing there, I think, is it should always be about the value that you're creating. It shouldn't be about you. This presentation is not about me and how great a leader I am or how fantastic I've performed in this role. It should be about how what I've worked on is actually delivering some value for the company. And I think that really resonates with leadership. So I'd say that's really key. But I think there are times when, if you are in a meeting with leaders and you're asked, what do you think you did particularly well, or what was the success of this project? You should have an answer for those type of things. There's your opportunity when you're invited to share your successes. You should definitely, that's an open door, and you should kick it down and go straight in. But I think otherwise, find ways to be visible, but make it about the value that you've created. That's always worked for me.
So this ties, go ahead.
I was going to add on to Lisa's great point. Looking ahead on like what's best for the team. So getting involved with strategic work, like not only the immediate things, but also like what can roadblock the team. Unroadblock the team in terms of like what they need and like improving their work stream. So definitely those areas helps. And also looking like longer term, mid to 5 years down the road, like how do you want to shape the team and help influence the company? So getting more involved with have like strategic work. And I know everyone here in this call is quite smart and motivated. So like using their best skills to put your best foot forward for those type of opportunities.
Yeah. And I agree. I think as you came into this, Louisa, you spoke to not being more assertive, I'll say, because we all hate that aggressive word, I guess, but assertive on salary and looking at position. And, it seems to classify as greedy sometimes when one gender does it. And, that for me, and I'm very similar, Louisa, to what you say. When we talk about value, though, I find that we as women usually say we and team, and we give the credit back to the whole. And I think men are a lot better at saying, I did this. And so I think there is a piece of it where both of us, so I don't think either of us are right where we need to be, have to be able to come to the table with a genuine story of success and share it with the right people, right? The people that really understand and take value in it themselves, right? But I just read something about an interview where the woman was being interviewed and she kept saying we and we and we and we, and the interviewer finally at the end said, well, what did you do? What did you do? Because there's a difference in sort of how we reflect that comprehensive team concept and what I've actually accomplished. And it's a fine line to walk, right? Because of that whole assertive, aggressive, greedy, conceited concept that I think's been built in almost to fragility to this conversation, right?
So we're all addressing this, and I do want to deep into this, unconscious biases, which is if a man does it, it's assertive, and if a woman does the same thing, it's aggressive, right? I mean, we've all talked about that a little bit. How do you overcome that? The societal unconscious bias of what a man's role is versus a woman's, what is the expectations, the double standards? How do you overcome that? What have you found to be most successful?
So that's a funny one too, and I'll jump on quickly because I think some people think that bias has to go away. And I think we all understand that bias will never go away because it is who we are, right? I mean, my husband and I had massive biases show up after we got married on what Christmas tradition should look like in our house, right? And it's like there's just simple little things that come to the table, but the de-biasing, I think, sometimes comes back to us, right? Managing how others view me, and then more importantly, how I view myself, right? I mean, it kind of comes back to that whole concept of what am I able to control and what am I not able to control? And I think that piece has at least driven balance, into being a part of the whole network when you can't control how others are applying their unconscious bias.
So we have this coming through the chat. What do you say to men that are saying, what do I do? How do I overcome the unconscious bias? If you're the lonely only, right? What do you say to everyone that's not the lonely only in the room to say, support me and know that I'm being assertive and not aggressive and overcome their own unconscious biases? What kind of advice would you have?
I mean, this is where training does have a role to play, and you, without a doubt, organizations that have, I think that very kind of well-known example of the example where they're hiring a candidate with the identical resumes, one was Jennifer and one was John, and significantly more people would recruit the John resume, and they were kind of more highly qualified and so on. They actually ran bias training on that group, and they did, they found obviously that had an impact. And we've seen that also in our own organization at AGCO. We've been running a program of training around unconscious bias for a number of years now, rolling it from management and then through the organization. So I think that has a role to play. I think kind of when you're thinking at it from a more systematic perspective, you have to actually look at how you can de-bias the system, because people will always have bias to some degree, and we all do have bias. And like Peggy said, that's not, you're never going to get rid of it entirely. But I think it's important for organizations to take a look at what some of the challenges are and actually talk to, you can survey and you can look at the data, but actually talk to your employees and understand where the issues are, and then pick, a couple of different areas and have some targeted actions. I think that can be really key. And then I think the other one is just to talk to your male colleagues. I think one of the most powerful things I've done in the last couple of years is a very small peer group with two male colleagues and myself, and we met for many months, once a week or once every 2 weeks on a Friday, and we actually went through what you call a development sprint. So you start to unpick the thinking behind why you do certain things. And what I really liked about it is every week you pick 2 experiments to run, very small experiments, low, with low consequences, a particular meeting, and I'm going to do something different. And you would disprove your kind of thinking, your erroneous thinking on something. And over 5 or 6 weeks, you'd actually do it enough times that you'd realize this is made up in your mind. And it was really interesting to have those conversations with my male colleagues, because we was a very open and there was a lot of trust built. And you'd see they were really surprised at some of the the concerns that I had and the things that I'd be thinking. And so having a conversation really helps to kind of open that up. But I do understand you need to build a certain level of trust to be able to do that. And that can be difficult sometimes to do at scale.
So digging a little bit deeper, and I know there's not a single right answer, but one of the most common topics that comes up when we talk about gender differences in the industry, but as a whole, is femininity. So do we embrace this? Do we adapt? Or do we aim to remove gender differences altogether? And again, I know there's not a right answer, but I'd really be interested in what your thoughts are, and how have you balanced being a leader, a manufacturing leader, or a woman manufacturing leader? And where have you drawn that line?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of jumping point of femininity. I think we need to embrace, who we are, right? And we have had advantages. So like being more empathetic and working with the teams, right? Helping the teams connect with one another is critical and important. Like, you, as Peggy and Louisa alluded to, in terms of like managing bias, you got to manage like what you're dealt with, right? In terms of your skills, some folks are like more analytical, some folks are more subjective, right? And in terms of this femininity, I think that power of empathy, and when you're like working with teams and like caring for each other, I think that goes definitely like a long way, and that helps you stand out. So like embracing your strength instead of looking, here are your weaknesses, and looking at areas of improvement, but at the same time, don't sell yourself short in terms of like where your strong suits are.
Yeah. Go ahead, Louisa.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's so interesting because I'm sure many of you have had these various personality tests. I've done many of them in my career, and I'm actually quite a fan of the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI. But the reality is, if you put 10, 15, 20 women in a room and you run that, I tell you, you're not going to get 20 same results. You have, and so I sometimes think we need to be a little bit careful of the stereotypes, because I think they can be harmful for women as much as men. So I think we've got to be aware of that. And when we talk about diversity, it's diversity of thought. It's bringing different types of personalities together in a team as well. And unless you actually proactively try and understand those individuals and what they bring, it can be difficult to build sort of teams with diverse thinking. But some of these tools are also can also be really powerful. But the lonely only, I was on actually a webinar a couple of weeks back, and it was the results of the Lean In, and McKinsey. They do this Women in the Workplace, and it was such a simple piece of advice. And I'd never thought about it before, and I almost kicked myself. They said, often take 100 women. Take a group of 100 people and you have 10 women in that group of 100. Most people would put together, and you're putting together teams, you put together 10 teams of 10, and you spread one woman out into each of the teams so that you're distributing the women. They said, just stop doing that. Create 2 teams with 5 women in each. That's your 10 women, and the rest can be all male teams, and see the difference. And I thought, what? Incredible. I had never thought about that. And maybe we don't need to always be lonely onlys. We just need to be a bit smarter about how we sort of distribute ourselves. Anyway, I don't know. I've not tried it yet, but it's something I'm going to do.
I cannot agree more, Louisa. And I think if what we're calling femininity is the results that some of those McKinseys and Korn Ferries have come back with on having women in leadership roles drives productivity, better communication, transformational ideas, better better recruiting. then yeah, embrace it, embrace all of it, right? Because I think it's just, it is that diversity that we're bringing to the table that is driving higher levels of achievement in these very large corporations. So bring it, embrace every aspect of it, and use it to drive value.
I love that. I love the idea too. That's a good idea I haven't heard of. Okay, so let's take a step back, if you will. And nearly 40% of women in engineering degrees, and this is just the report, have either quit too soon after entering the field, or they just don't go at all. And we know, of course, that engineering, but it's true across all STEM, which is so critical in manufacturing. So how are we starting to address these issues that are all related to the confidence gap in our education system, which then, of course, leads to the issue in our workplaces? Any ideas? I know it's a big question. Clearly, we haven't solved it, or we would have solved it decades ago. But as people who you've gone through this sorts of educational system, and what do we do? What do we do earlier to stem this, to stem the STEM problem earlier?
There's a UK organization called Women in STEM Education, and they've put together a really interesting 10-step program that, and it is really based on that whole, how do you take more of a systematic approach? And so it can be, it's looking at the whole process from recruitment and retention and building kind of employee resource groups. And so I do feel like there's not an easy answer. And I do feel like it can be quite closely linked to the culture of an organization as well. And I think that's sometimes where the talking to people, the data can play a big role, because very different industries tend to have a different kind of pipeline. They can kind of be squeezed at the start. So it's very difficult, very few women going in, squeezed in the middle. You've got that kind of glass ceiling, and then sometimes it's squeezed at the end, or in many cases it's always squeezed at the top. So so it's really about digging in and seeing where are the issues. But I personally feel there's no you have to talk to the women in the business, and leaders often are surprised at what they learn from just talking to people. And so sometimes employee resource groups, for example, can be really powerful in some of that as well.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think, the younger, so I think of an example with my eldest daughter. She was able to, in middle school, participate in a astronomy course, probably 2 weeks, or the college put it on. And she's now an astrophysicist at UC Berkeley, teaching and doing research and launching rockets. So I think we need to bring it to them more realistically in what it can be, right? And the same has been for all my kids. They've had the great fortune to be plugged into colleges where they can experiment, they can take a class just because they're curious, or their fear may make them think, oh, maybe I want to know more about what's really out there, and I think they're the hands-on, the ability to really see, touch, and feel it, and experience it. And then the mentoring, right? I think, how do we hook up these younger, and I know there's FabFem, there's things online where we can hook young people in to ask questions of people in professions they think they might be interested in. And I think that mentoring and that hands-on at that younger age is so influential. But the younger the mind, the more influential it is, right? Where they can really kind of task into it. You get to college and they've already sort of picked a path, right? I mean, it's harder to jump back, but.
So what we're really talking about is something called imposter syndrome, right? That starts very, very early. And then if we are talking about the current workplace and the current women in the workplace, they've likely all experienced imposter syndrome at some point going through their journeys through educational system and now in their careers. What can we do to shift that out? Okay, now we know it's there. We see that there's an issue here, that I feel like an imposter, I'm having this difficulty. What can I do now to change that? How can I change my own psyche?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question as well. Definitely with changing new functions, new company, and like managing teams new, definitely been feeling it, specific for imposter syndrome. But kind of looking back at things that helped have been seeking advice also. A lot of my mentors actually they don't look like me. They're not female, right? For example, there are folks that are really good at just providing advice and also just like tidbits. They probably are not even in a formal mentoring role, but like folks that have good values and can share like and provide that directional guidance. But again, they don't know everything either. And so along my career journey, I've talked to like different folks to kind of understand how they navigated their career path. And it kind of helps me actually in a way understand what's specifically to myself internally versus other things that other folks on the team have been experiencing as well. So again, like, systematic bias versus something that's internally that you have to manage. So that has helped tease the differences. And actually, when you're talking to a lot of these folks, like when they're first time managing a team or when they're like transitioning different functions, they're kind of going through the same, process and also question set. And like now we're transitioning back to kind of more hybrid workforce with some of my team not being in the office. And so we're like, how do we do this? Right. Which is like not one size fits all.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I recently read a book on imposter syndrome, and we had a workshop at AGCO, and we actually had the author come along and talk to us, and so it was a really nice experience. And I actually talked to my sister. My sister's she's a carer. It's a completely different industry, not this sort of manufacturing and thinking about leadership and so on. She's kind of going about business. And the minute I talked to her about it, she said, "Oh my goodness, she has exactly the same experience in her role." And so it is something that we all experience. But I think, to your point, Sandra, I think having a mentor, someone that you can talk through and know that this often it's very normal to feel like this, and talk about this sort of, we talk about a change curve, but it's a little bit more like a sort of bad signature where you have this naive confidence at first, and you kind of feel that you're going to be fantastic, and then you quickly realize how much you don't know, and that's the point when you're most vulnerable, I think. But it's normal, and I've probably every 2 years I've changed role, and I kind of keep going through it now, and so now I know it's going to come and it's going to get better. And sometimes just having someone to talk through and work through it is in itself can help, but a lot of it is very much inward. And so for me personally, just kind of, I do a meditation every day now, and actually just taking a moment to recognize my thoughts and know that it's negative self-talk, or and work through that. If you don't recognize it and you're just living like this, it can be really challenging. So sometimes it's about acknowledging and recognizing the way that you're thinking, then taking a moment to pause and reflect, and then work through it and kind of talk to someone or talk yourself up and kind of work through it that way. That helps as well.
Adding a really quick comment to that too, and Luis, I think we had a discussion on this back in another panel we had at AGCO, but mentoring, not even being mentored and being talked to about how we feel with the imposter, but mentoring others on the imposter syndrome, for some reason, drives strength back into your own positioning and your own value and your own ability to not fall into that imposter syndrome. I don't know. So talking both directions, I agree. You need someone who talks you through it when it hits, but in working with the younger generations to help them recognize it, I find that it's far less apt to sort of pop up on my shoulder as it used to be in the past.
So I have to ask, Louisa, what's the name of the book?
I just posted it. It's called Finding Your Fierce, Teresa Sanday. She's actually coming back to do a broader workshop with women at AGCO. Actually, we had such a good session with her that we've invited her and asked her to come back and do it again. So it's a really nice book.
It's a great book.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that, the both of you just touched on a little bit, is microaggressions and how we're dealing with microaggressions and how those impact your confidence, impact your imposter syndrome. Like, it's all a big cycle, right? What have you done? What is the most successful thing that you've found to overcome those kinds of microaggressions? And what I'm thinking of for those in the audience is there are studies that have shown that women and minorities, to be clear, have to provide more evidence for presenting information before it's accepted. It's a environmental behavioral microaggression, but it is something that then directly impacts your confidence and your ability and the perception of confidence. So what do you do in those sorts of situations?
That's like 1,000 cuts. I think that's the challengingness, really challenging. I actually am going to look at something here and quote this, because I think I mentioned this the other day to a colleague about the microaggressions and the impact that it can have, and it's from the Lean-In research. But some of the examples, having your competence questioned, being overlooked, being disrespected, really worrying that the percentages. And actually, when you look across the board, as one example, needing to provide more evidence of your judgment. 28% of white women citing that, 30% Asian women, 28% Latinas, and 40% Black women. I mean, this is something that we really do need to come together as allies to challenge. It's super difficult to do this yourself when you're in the situation, let alone to actually recognize it in the moment. So that, again, I think this is where you need people to look out for you, and colleagues to also help you challenge these things, because it's obviously knocking your confidence, and so you're less likely to challenge them as well. I had a really great example with another female in a meeting where we did identify a couple of things, and we caught each other's eye across the room. And I think that moment of connection and recognizing it did allow us to kind of challenge it. And but it's not an easy one. But I think, again, first understanding what do they look like, and then talking to women about it, I think, is a big step in the right direction.
So let's shift focus a little bit now and talk about what is the company's responsibility. So we know every study out there shows the confidence gap, imposter syndrome, microaggressions, they all exist, and they all exist unequitably for men and women. So what is, and I'll talk about another study, but PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, just found actually this year that young women starting out in science and technology jobs consistently get lower salary offers than their male counterparts. Mm-hmm. What is the role then of companies in addressing this confidence, capability, imposter syndrome, the confidence gap as a whole?
That's a big question.
It's a big question.
I think so, and I don't think there's one answer. So maybe, Sandra and Louisa, we can build a list here. But, I think one of the places that all companies start is with education, right? And, I question sometimes, are we educating the right people? Because we're bringing all the women together, but it's really men in the middle tier of the company that are really in control of promoting and some of the decisions we have. So I think training is the key piece of it. And I'm not sure I have an answer. And Louisa, you're going to be so well versed, better versed than I am from the HR side. But, how do we train the right people? I mean, to bring that next generation through differently than how we've gone through the process, right?
Yeah, and I think we mentioned researchers like managing bias, microaggressions, like all these great topics. It's like something that, like, the previous generation, like my mother, have never even heard of, like, in a way, right? Unaware. But now, like, we're starting that slowly in terms of training and getting that knowledge piece. So like I can recognize it. But then again, kind of moving forward, like the next generation, like, is it going to be better? It sounds promising that it will be better in that sense.
We also need to put more women in leadership positions. I mean, that does start to address some of those issues. I also think there's a role, beyond the company as well, and to think kind of more at a policy level. Again, being back in the UK, I don't know if it's the same in the US, but you have to actually publish your pay gap data. It has to be put out there. If you're an organization of a certain size, you have to put the data out there, and then you kind of like in the spotlight. Then what are you doing to address? And I know we're talking about pay here, but I think there are things that you can do in some of these other areas as well to start to kind of level the field. So yeah, absolutely, the individual has some responsibility, and collectively the company, absolutely. But I don't think you can deal with everything overnight. So it's like I said, again, going in and prioritizing like 2 or 3 specific areas that you can make some improvements on, and then you kind of move through. So it is a step by step, and it's a bit of a hill to climb. Mm-hmm.
Did you see Google, the next generation coming in all went out and posted their salaries, I believe? Like everyone went out, and I mean, so you're right. I think that's the direction it's going, where transparency is going to be something that drives it. But I'm not sure that they'll be timely enough if we're not already greasing the skids and laying the tracks for, like you just said, let's just put some women in leadership roles, right? I mean, we can't just wait for the next generation to come in and fix this.
So I love this conversation. When we're talking about one of the most common things that companies do, it's ERGs. And Louisa, you brought this up earlier. ERG seems to be the first step that most companies take to address their gender gap. But we also know that 70% of women are saying they're not well utilized. We're not using ERGs to their best efforts. So what should companies be doing? What are the best practices that you've seen of, okay, we're going to address the competence gap. We're going to address how we're promoting women and the disparities between the genders. What is something successful that an ERG can or should do to help bolster and close that gender gap in the industry?
I think I come back again to visibility sometimes as well, because we actually, Peggy was also involved with this. We ran a program not long back to try and bring together women in engineering, manufacturing and supply chain to kind of break down silos, build networks. And the one thing that was really powerful there was also giving them exposure to senior leadership. And allowing them to tell their stories and you know, some of the successful projects and initiatives that they've been involved with, and that was kind of really powerful. So I think that's kind of a simple thing that you can do with kind of leveraging an ERG. So yeah, that kind of networking, maybe also mentorship, I think is also quite powerful, and even rather than just traditional, you know, someone more experienced in the business mentoring someone less experienced, or a man mentoring a woman, also reverse mentorship's quite interesting. We've recently done a mentorship program where we've had younger people coming into the business actually mentoring our leadership team. So sort of flipping the switch, especially with, you know, the rate of change in technology, then it's a great, you know, opportunity there as well. But it all comes down to that visibility again. So I think that can be really powerful and shouldn't be kind of underestimated.
You know, tagging on that program too, Louisa, you bring up it was a great program. And I think there's one more piece on it that I thought lent great value. So there was really that ally approach to the program. So when these women, it wasn't groups, it was individuals, when they had to present, we gave them training on working on their PowerPoint. They practiced with a certain group of allies that could give them input and feedback. So sometimes those programs are almost scarier than they're valuable, because they're just sort of getting thrown in to stand in front of this leadership team and do something. But those allies, I think, in that program were critical, right? I mean, there was a whole bunch of work going on behind the scenes. Not only did it grow the network, but it gave them the confidence that they needed to do to stand up in front of a group of executives that they'd never presented to with an idea that they believed in. So that was a great program, you're right.
And that constructive feedback super powerful as well, because I did read somewhere research that said men are less likely to give women frank feedback on where they could improve. And, you know, because of maybe some kind of stereotype around how a woman might react if she receives negative feedback, I don't know. But it's, you know, it's true. And I don't know if any of you have ever felt a little, you know, you feel good about yourself when you've done something well, but you also know where you could have improved it too. And when you just get told that you did a great job, sometimes you feel a bit cheated. And actually, it is the case that men get more constructive feedback that really helps propel their progression. And so that's kind of, you know, maybe something that we could all also do. And I've even started to think more about this now. How can I, you know, if one of the senior leadership or even our CEO says, you know, great job, well, really appreciate that. But can I challenge you to give me an area that I could be even better next time? Or how could I be stronger next time when I do this? So it's also something that we could also be asking for more feedback to help us as well.
I agree.
Andrew, I think you had something to add.
Yeah, no, we also have career development series where folks are talking about career different like function role transitions when we get to the managerial stage, you know, director stage and VP stage. So having that visibility is very important, and probably more important than ever. I'm still in a hybrid workplace environment where some folks are still at home, right? And they're distributed versus folks who are like, you know, co-located in the workplace. So before, like, I will be able to see potential, you know, folks I could connect with right in the hallway, but I can't do that anymore. And so like the quote unquote like lonely, you know, one, like we don't want that, right? And so more than ever, I think the ERG groups have been trying to connect with one another. And then something light touch that we also do is, I know there's a lot of book topics and articles that have been, you know, shared today. We also do have like this very light kind of book reading club that we participate to. And so usually they'll take like a relevant article, like a quick read, 3 minutes. So instead of a long book that you can tackle at a later time, we have like these articles that we see snippets of. And then if there's, you know, to spur the conversation, we do have like chats right after to go through like things that we have noticed, you know, that's like systematic or like in public, to kind of tease out what's like, if it's like a personal microaggression or, you know, something that's team specific versus things that like almost like every company is facing these days.
That's great. So you guys have all been talking a little bit about the greater company need, and allyship has come up quite a bit. And when we talk about allyship, Louise, I know you had a great example earlier too of getting two allies, essentially two males together to do some tests. But what, for those, and this is coming up a lot in the chat, how do you get them engaged? What do you do? It's uncomfortable. How do you build that trust to say, okay, I need you to be my ally? And how, you know, the conversation that you were just having, Peggy and Louisa, specifically about the program that you ran, how did you get them engaged to say, give them feedback and tell them about their PowerPoint presentation? What do you do to get them engaged, and what is their role?
Yeah. So in the case of the program that Louisa and I spoke to, that was, and I actually think this is the way it needs to start, because you need to put the example out there, but it was completely coordinated agenda, people chosen, right, to be the allies and to come in and influence. But I think as you take, it exponentially expands itself as you take and teach those tools to that group of men and women that you're taking through this program. We all know they go out and use it every day, at least those things that resonated with them, right, that influence even broader. But I think those allies, you know, it's tough. Being an ally is a tough job, right? You're an influencer. You're always out there walking the talk, and you're making sure that you're at the coffee machine, at that, right, that you're always bringing that message. The program we spoke to was really more of an organized program, but I think it's starting to teach that understanding of the contribution that comes in from the broader network when you're bringing these people or mentoring and coaching people to bring them forward.
Yeah, a lot of the folks that I've allied with, you don't just go in and be like, hey, you want to be my ally here.
Yeah.
A lot of the allies have come naturally through folks I worked with in terms of project-based work. They're building that reputation, that trust, knowing, you know, what are your values and a good product, like output that you produce for the company. And so those folks have naturally become my allies. So like, you know, if there's anything that they'll notice in the meeting to amplify, right, your voice. So just a tidbit on, you know, how to find allies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You know, it's so easy to put a label on it, and then you sort of hunting around for this thing. It's very similar to mentors. I agree exactly with what you said, Sandra. You know, we if you go up to someone and say, will you be my mentor? You know, the reality is, if you have a great conversation with someone and it kind of gets onto a topic, they give you some useful insights, you go away and, you know, do something different or take on board some of their feedback, and then go and talk to them about it again and say, hey, you know, you told me this thing the other day, I did it and it worked out like this. You know, that's developing a mentorship kind of arrangement if it's outside of a formal program. And I think the whole piece around building allies is very similar. You know, you can probably, it's hard to put a name of an ally on someone, but you can probably identify some people in the company that you've had a great conversation with, that you trust, or that you've started to build trust with, and you can go and maybe ask them to give you some guidance or help you out with something.
Yeah.
Can and should your allies be different than your mentors, be different than your sponsors? Sponsors being the people that walk into the room and say, Louise is great, hire her. Should those all be different roles, or can they all be one and the same?
I think that's a difficult one. I think a mentor and a sponsor I'd see kind of more closely aligned. it definitely needs to be someone that can go in and kind of speak on your behalf and, you know, create a good narrative for you and talk you up at times. I guess they can be an ally too, but sometimes, I don't know, I also think there's sometimes a slight line of how, I mean, I tend to be maybe too open sometimes, but there's sometimes a line that you want to draw with how open you might be with, say, an ally versus a mentor. But that's just a personal view. I don't know what others think.
You know, I think allies, from my definition or opinion, allies are a little bit, coaches and mentors, to Luisa's point, can flip back and forth, right? Coaching and sponsoring with question or job viability. But, you know, allies, I don't think you always know they're there being allies, right? I can be an ally for you, AJ, and you didn't come to me and ask for that, but I'm like, oh my gosh, she's so awesome, and she's right. There's that, I mean, to me, allies are those almost cheerleaders within that place that are always promoting, pumping up, validating, confirming. It doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one relationship. I can actually probably be an ally to you and you won't even be in the room, right? So I think it's important to understand that they're the 24/7 rah-rah, making sure in the most positive way that we're promoting each other. So I think I look at it a little differently. I don't think I have to be there to be coaching and mentoring. I do sponsoring, but sponsoring maybe not as much. But allies are the ones that they're us. They're all these people here who are trying to figure out how to bring all of us up, right? That's allies to me.
So I know we're about hitting time, but I do have one question that keeps coming up in the chat. And that is the larger societal role. So knowing that the confidence gap starts at a very young age, they're seeing it as soon as kindergartners, right? How are we addressing this, especially with the pandemic? And we just saw working mothers leaving the workforce in the millions from their dual roles and the inequities of the dual roles that they have both at work and then domestically. So the question that keeps coming up is and this is a big one, but what is our responsibility as women and men who want to close inequities between the two to make a bigger societal impact for that next generation? We started to get there, but how far does our responsibility go for the larger generation versus our own families, our own careers, our own selves? Where do we draw that line? You know, it's not, I see all the faces. It's not an easy answer, but it is one of those things that I think has come up time and time again because we know that there has to be a larger change.
Now's the time. I mean, for sure, now's the time, if there's a time at all, to start to make those bigger changes. And, you know, companies are grappling with this, you know, how are we going to go back and what might the future look like? So I think it's definitely a good opportunity to, you know, if we sort of have a broader obligation to society to try and leverage this point in time. Let's think more creatively about how we can be flexible, how we can support people better. Yeah, but I definitely don't have a quick win for you on that one.
It also sounds like we're all learning from this too, right? Like even having this webinar, right? And how many opportunities we have of recognizing or even calling that out. The article that AJ mentioned, it's like raising that awareness and recognizing that this is going to be a larger long-term issue. Don't think we have the answers today in this webinar, but it's something to like spur on to talk about in the individual applicable workplaces.
Yeah, and I think there's places in the career that are, the early time in the career is the toughest part for us, right? Where we feel like we can't leave, we have to be, especially if you're in manufacturing, on a manufacturing floor, right? I think that when we get into later times in our careers, we have a little more flexibility. So I think where we support is huge. I think I read recently the World Economic Forum said it was going to take 217 years to close the gender gap in the workplace. So, you know, this is the greatest conversation, AJ, because I do think we can't boil the ocean, but we do have to focus on those places like early times in the career and how we can get more flexibility for women, or the coaching and the allies. But, you know, it's critical conversation. I mean, it is, we all pause every time you ask a question, because it's like, it's huge, right? It's 217 years worth of huge. So yeah.
Yeah, and we're not going to be able to answer today, but this conversation has been very, very helpful and very enlightening, as you can see from the chat and all of the messages that I received. It's something I don't think anybody has a solution for, which is why it's going to take so long and has already taken so long. But having your insights and your willingness to speak to us today and be candid is oh so important. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us as panelists. I really appreciate it. And I do want to share that we have more information. So feel free to get connected. We have data, we have research, we have an online community that is completely open to the public to continue the conversation. And anything that any of the audience is looking for, please reach out to me directly at an email, and we will happy to support and provide. And thank you so much for joining us today and giving us an hour of your time.